Hello everyone and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into an incredibly high-stakes institutional standoff. On one hand, you've got the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, and they are demanding transparency and accountability. On the other hand, you've got the Department of Justice, which is currently led by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Now, this isn't just a story about some botched paperwork. It's a fundamental clash over trust, transparency, and what it actually means to protect crime victims. We're going to break down exactly why Epstein survivors are demanding justice today, and we'll be looking at the hard facts, the timelines, and direct testimonies to do it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The AG confirmation showdown. 2. Botched files, broken trust. 3. A tense closed-door meeting. 4. Investigating the enablers. And 5. The ongoing fight for justice.
Section 1. The AG confirmation showdown. To really grasp this conflict, we've got to anchor it in the recent Senate confirmation hearings for Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Let's look at how fast this timeline moves because it's pretty wild. So in December 2025, these heavily anticipated Epstein files were finally released to the public under a new Transparency Act. But almost right out of the gate, that release was flagged for some devastating errors. Then, fast forward to mid-July 2026, Todd Blanche is facing the Senate Judiciary Committee for his confirmation. Over those 2 days, July 15th and 16th, explosive testimony from survivors just completely takes center stage. On July 17th, feeling the heat, Blanche finally meets with the survivors. And literally all of this is building up to a massive legal deadline on July 30th, 2026, which we are definitely going to get to in just a bit. So you can see how this rapid sequence of events took what was basically a botched administrative task and turned it into a massive confirmation showdown.
Now, there's a legal concept we need to talk about: the presumption of regularity. It's a foundational doctrine that basically means courts just assume our government is acting honestly and in good faith. So why does this matter to us? Well, former DOJ career attorney Elizabeth Oyer, who, by the way, was actually fired by Blanche, testified that this baseline trust is eroding, and that affects every single citizen who relies on a fair justice system. She pointed out that courts are literally openly questioning if the DOJ still deserves this trust. She noted at least 90 documented instances of the government presenting misleading information and over 700 instances of violating judicial orders. When that baseline trust fractures like that, it perfectly explains the hostile environment these Epstein survivors are trying to navigate.
Section 2. Botched files, broken trust. Because the root of the survivors' outrage right now isn't just about the past. It stems directly from how the DOJ handled that December 2025 file release. During his Senate testimony, Acting Attorney General Blanchett did address the outcry over that document release. He apologized, and he stated that mistakes were made in only 1% of the documents. He also pointed out that the DOJ put a ton of resources into fixing those mistakes, pulling documents down within minutes of being told about them. But here is the absolute critical issue. For the victims, that quote-unquote 1% had a devastating human cost, and you can't just erase that with a clerical update. Let's look at the actual specifics of those errors. The DOJ exposed the personal identifying information of survivors. They outed Jane Does, who had literally fought for decades in court to keep their anonymity. Horrifically, they even leaked nude images of the victims themselves, which just compounded the profound trauma of their initial exploitation. And while the victims' lives were being laid bare for the world to see, the DOJ heavily redacted the names of Epstein's alleged enablers and associates. As survivor Danielle Lubensky testified, victims lost their privacy, they suffered huge reputational harm, they lost jobs, and many of them now genuinely fear for their physical safety. I mean, we really cannot overstate the institutional negligence that re-victimized these women.
And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast that whistleblowers and survivors are pointing out. Think about it. On one hand, you have Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker currently serving a 20-year sentence. According to Oyer's testimony, Blanche actually spent 2 days meeting with Maxwell. She was transferred to a minimum security prison camp, and get this, she was even allowed special meals like Camembert cheese. On the flip side, you have whistleblower Elizabeth Oyer, who was fired and intimidated by armed marshals, and you have the survivors, whose identities were exposed and whose requests for meetings with the DOJ were completely ignored for months. It's this micro-narrative of institutional priorities that survivors find, frankly, deeply unjust.
This whole perception was heavily compounded by a statement Blanche made to Fox News back in February 2026. He said, "The American people need to understand that it isn't a crime to party with Mr. Epstein." Now, for the survivors, this wasn't just some legal observation. It felt incredibly dismissive. They view this as a total betrayal of the DOJ's duty to protect victims and to aggressively go after those who might have facilitated these crimes. Section 3. A tense closed-door meeting. So, after months of being met with silence, the survivors did finally secure a face-to-face meeting with Acting Attorney General Blanche. But it didn't happen because the DOJ suddenly had a change of heart. It happened because of raw political leverage. Republican Senator Thom Tillis, who happens to be a key vote on the Senate Judiciary Committee, made a very public demand. He stated clearly that he expected a meeting between the victims and Blanche to happen before he'd be willing to vote Blanche out of committee. So this was literally a mandatory hurdle for Blanche to secure his Attorney General confirmation. The voice of the survivors really needs to take center stage here. During the Senate hearings leading up to that meeting, Danny Bensky delivered this incredibly powerful testimony. She looked right at the committee and said, "We are not activists. We are crime victims." She really emphasized that for them, this has never been about partisan politics. It's strictly about getting justice for the crimes committed against them, period. So on July 17th, the meeting finally happens over at DOJ headquarters. And how did it go? Well, according to Bensky, the long-awaited meeting felt entirely performative. She described it as a mere check-the-box exercise intended strictly to secure votes for his confirmation. Even Blanche himself acknowledged to reporters afterward that the meeting wasn't exactly all cordial. The allegations about how this closed-door meeting went down are explosive. Survivors claim they were repeatedly cut off and just told to get to the point. They left with absolutely no answers regarding active investigations. But honestly, perhaps the most stunning revelation was the DOJ's stark claim, which the survivors vehemently reject by the way, that they currently lack evidence that Epstein trafficked women to other men. Blanche noted that this doesn't mean it didn't happen, and he did encourage victims to meet with the FBI, but he essentially admitted he couldn't promise them the prosecutions they're so desperately seeking. Section 4. Investigating the enablers. Let's clarify exactly what these survivors are actually demanding and why the legal stakes around these Epstein files matter so much.
So, the crucial point is this. Those black boxes and redactions in the millions of released documents, they aren't just bureaucratic red tape to the survivors. To them, those black boxes represent hidden enablers. They firmly believe that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell did not build and run this massive international trafficking operation all by themselves. The survivors believe those redactions are shielding guilty, high-profile co-conspirators.
Their core demands are very clear and they are highly actionable. First, they want the DOJ to actively investigate alleged co-conspirators. Second, they want the concealed names in those files unredacted. Third, they're demanding the review and translation of hundreds of thousands of foreign language documents, which they believe could actually prove there was an international network. And fundamentally, they just want the government to treat this whole situation as a rigorous criminal investigation, rather than just some political crisis that needs to be managed and swept under the rug. And if you think there are no leads left to follow, well, consider the number 2. Bensky pointed out in her testimony that just a few weeks ago, House Oversight Chairman James Comer directed Acting Attorney General Blanche to open investigations into 2 specific men connected to Epstein. For the survivors, this is concrete proof that there are absolutely still investigative leads to follow, if the DOJ is actually willing to pursue them. Section 5. The ongoing fight for justice. Because while the political gridlock up in Congress continues, there is a massive legal breakthrough happening right now in the judicial system that could truly change everything. Attorney and journalist Katie Pang actually filed a lawsuit against the DOJ over these redactions, and in late June 2026, she secured a huge victory. U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan decided to bypass the political noise entirely. He legally ordered the DOJ to hand over 10 specific, highly disputed records, completely unredacted, no black boxes whatsoever, for his own private judicial review by July 30th, 2026. Guys, this is huge. The judge is going to see exactly what the DOJ has been hiding. He also ordered the DOJ to initiate the review of those foreign language documents the survivors have been begging for.
Katie Pang's motivation here perfectly captures the spirit of the survivors and their advocates. She said, "I was waiting for the right thing to be done by this administration and the DOJ, and I would be an idiot to keep on waiting for it to happen. And so that's when we decided to file suit." They've taken this entire David versus Goliath fight directly to the federal courts, essentially eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Which really leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. With a federal judge now stepping in to personally review the unredacted files, bypassing the DOJ's red tape, will these hidden emails finally crack the network of enablers wide open?
We are literally on the precipice of finding out exactly what's behind those black boxes. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes locked on July 30th, because the pursuit of justice here is far, far from over.